everyone, and welcome to Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. Today is a very special day. You know, I'm always bringing folks who get us to think, who get us to uh, look in perspective at what our lives are like, what value there is to our past, and how we can look to our past to help empower us for the future. Well, let me tell you something. Our guest today has been doing that very creatively through her artwork, through her activism. She is Michelle Browder. She's an American artist and activist known for her sculptures in Montgomery, Alabama, and also her historical tours of the area. She's done a tremendous amount of work focusing on the sacrifice that African American women made in this particular case in the field of gynecology, not because they wanted to, but because a doctor back in the 1840s forced them to be patients, and he became known as the father of gynecology, unfortunately using our ancestors in order to build this field of study. She's going to talk about that and more, her work, her creativity, her activism in a community that has been known forever as the hotbed of racism. And she's here to talk about it now. So please join me in welcoming Michelle Browder.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. So, Michelle, I want to start by saying you are an artist.
Yes.
And if we look over time at artists, we often will see that artists, some artists anyhow, are able to see the world in a different way and bring sometimes pretty traumatic concepts to life in ways that people are able to look at them.
hmm
And that certainly is something that you are doing with your work. I want to go back and ask you, when did you know you were an artist, and how did being a creator come to you as your path?
Mm. Now, Harriet,
Yeah, I want to know.
you're taking me back to my troublesome days.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, because so my discovery, or my father actually discovered my art when I was in high school. I was bullied. I came from a family and from a city, Denver, Colorado. At that time, it was, in our section where we lived in our neighborhood, it was pretty integrated. We had, white folks. A little white girl next door to me was Heather Dobson. She had freckles and, cherry, strawberry blonde hair. And across the street was the Bukdong family from Vietnamese, the Vietnamese family. Up the street was the Hernandez, and then my babysitters and people that surrounded me as my community, my inner community, were, strong Black Panther women, right? Formerly Black Panther women. And then to move to Verbena, Alabama at the age of 9, it was just, it was traumatizing, right? Because in my community, we had a diverse group of folks. Um, and then to move to the newly integrated South, where the N word was still at play, where people would, you know, call you that. My teachers called me that
What?
as a child, yes. And then, because my mother was from Chicago, Illinois, the shy, we had good diction. My father was military, and so we were bullied all the time. Oh, we're you white Black folk, you speak good, so it was always a fight. And my third suspension, after I knocked the kid out, my father was like, now my father is the first Black prison chaplain that was appointed by Governor George Wallace. We moved to
Wait, wait,
Alabama.
wait. Say that again, because that is uh, that's so
Yeah,
many things right there. Say that again.
yeah, my father, Chaplain Curtis Browder, was the first Black prison chaplain appointed by segregation today, tomorrow, forever, George Wallace.
Wow, I
And
got chills.
yeah, yeah. And so, and I had to be tough as a kid too, because, my father in the state of Alabama, if you EOS, the end of your sentence, if you don't have a home plan at that time, they keep you in prison. So
Mm.
you may have done your 20 years, but if you don't have an address to go to, you stayed there. So my father was like, absolutely not. So I would wake up, and on the floor next to me would be, Lonnie from Cell Block 9 who killed and sodomized folks. You know what I'm saying? My
Wow.
father brought these people home. Chaka was
Wow.
my babysitter. She was a Black woman. She had mental health issues, but she was raped as a kid. Her husband pimped her out. That was my babysitter. You know, that was my friend. So, you know, it had to kind of be tough. But going to this school and to be bullied as a kid, I just knock a person out. So the third suspension, my father was like, now listen, if you don't get it together, figure out how you're going to channel your energy in this. He said, because people are always not going to like you. You're always going to be bullied. He said, so figure out a way to use that energy into something good. And he literally brought me 8 tubes of paint. He said, now you're not going to sit here and watch Oprah Winfrey all day, these next 2 days. Because I was an Oprah fanatic. You know, I was an Oprah fanatic at that time because, you know, latchkey kids. When you come home,
Sure.
nobody that was Oprah. And so he says, you're not going to sit here and watch her all day. I'm going to bring you something for you to do. And he brought me 8 tubes of paint and 10 t-shirts. And that was for the men in prison. He was taking it to them, but he gave it to me. And he said, do something creative. And, you know, and so that's what I did. And that's when, at the age of 13, I figured out, oh, I have something going here. And I sold those t-shirts when I got, so, and then the principal calls my father and was like, so you're not going to come up and have this teacher parent conference? He was like, no. He was like, my daughter's okay. You all need to get your stuff together, but my daughter's fine. And I sold those t-shirts and have been an entrepreneur ever since.
See, I knew there was a story. That's why I asked you, Michelle. When you see Michelle's work, everybody, you know this is coming from a deep place.
Yes.
So the storytelling is there, yes, but also to tap into the, you know, the crevices that I see when I look at your work. I know that it's coming from some place that is deep within you, that connects to the subject matter. And honestly, as you know, Michelle, very often the most creative work emerges out of pain.
Yes,
I mean,
yes,
just,
absolutely.
And so you started with paint and t-shirts.
Yes.
And where did you go from there?
So the school started elevating me as their prep school, or, you know, whenever the pep rallies would come, they would call me and ask me to design all types of signs. And so I became very popular in high school. And so my guidance counselor was like, you need to go to art school. So I went to Chicago first, and because I have family there. And I was going to go to the Chicago Art Institute, and decided to move to Atlanta, and went to Atlanta, Georgia, and studied graphic design and visual communications there. And that's where I was living my best life.
What made it your best life?
I was an entrepreneur. So, you know, and I was 18 at the time, and was running my own graphic design business and just t-shirts and things of that nature. But experienced some racism at the college. And that's when I learned of Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy. That's when I saw this painting.
Okay.
Yes, when I was in college. Yes.
So tell us about them and your discovery of them, because I'm going to venture to say that most people who are listening have never heard of these women. Mm-hmm. And I think your work has definitely helped to elevate our awareness of who they are. Take us into your, you know, that introduction story.
Yeah. So I had this really racist instructor who, he had a picture of these 3 women. It was a painting by Robert Tom. Robert Tom was commissioned in 1952. This particular piece was 1952 of J. Marion Sims. And it's a pretty popular photo or print that you all probably recognize when you see it. But it's of a Black woman. She's grasping her chest. She's kneeling, but she's on like a gurney. And the doctor, the white doctor, has his arms folded, and there's 2 other doctors around him. And then there's 2 Black women peering from behind a sheet, and they look scared, right? And they're dressed in their, not African, but their slave clothing. And it puzzled me. It was something, it just didn't sit with me. I didn't like to look on their faces and, you know, how proud and haughty this doctor was. And so I asked my instructor, I was like, why do you have this on your desk? Was it, you know, what is it? And he was like, well, you know, it's figurative, you know, gave me some off color remark. And I I just held on to that. And so at the time, there was this really popular place called the Shrine of the Black Madonna.
Oh, yes.
You remember them?
Oh,
And I
yes.
would go there. I would go to Clark Atlanta University. Well, it was Clark and Atlanta University. And I would just soak up everything that I could about Black history. And, because I would get it from my family, but, we didn't get it in school. We got Dr. King Had a Dream and Rosa Parks Had Aching Feet. That's what come on now. That was the extent of Black history. And so when I turned 18 and was in Atlanta, I was soaking it up. Shrine of the Black Madonna. I would go to all of these rallies and just listen to the books and read the books and all that they had to offer. I was soaking it in. And then I discovered Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy. Dr. Joy DeGruy, she wrote about it. Oprah Winfrey had a show when I was a kid, and she talked about the fistula studies and what was happening in Africa with these women. And I remember all of this. And then when I moved to Alabama at the request of my mother, because I had gone to college and was doing great in my business, and she's like, our ministry is growing and we need some graphic design and you could be our public relations person. And I'm like, you have 5 other kids. You need to call one of them. And she says, no, you are the one that we feel God is calling to come home. And I'm like, oh, schizophrenia. But I said, let me think about it. It took me 2 years. And I moved to Alabama, to Montgomery, Alabama, only to discover that J. Marion Sims, the doctor in this photo, and this painting is at our state's capitol, even right now today. He stands there.
So tell us that story, because you mentioned bits of it, but I'm going to assume again that people do not know. So
yeah.
Who is J. Marion Sims and what did he do?
Yeah. So moving to Montgomery, Alabama, learning about this doctor. He stands at our state's capitol. And that is when I started really doing some in-depth studying. I had heard about him through Harriette Washington and through Dr. Joyce DeGruy and medical apartheid. This doctor in Montgomery, Alabama, he moved here and started to practice. And slave owners would bring their property, because this is chattel slavery. So they would bring their property to Sims to conduct these surgeries and really experiments on these enslaved African girls, the youngest as early as 9. There were 11 of them total. And these oppressors would bring him their property to try to stitch and or suture a fistula, which was called a vesicovaginal fistula, which was caused during prolonged childbirth. And he opened up his practice.
So let me just go into that again, because a little more deeply, because I didn't know what a fistula was. What is it? And you mentioned that Oprah had done a story about it from Africa.
Yes.
What is it and why does it happen to people?
It's a hole that forms during prolonged childbirth. And it's really in the bladder area, from the constant wearing down of the tissue. And oftentimes it's urine. It's a constant flow. It causes a constant flow of urine and or fecal matter. And so these girls, we had breeding plantations in Montgomery, Alabama. And so the 3 that we're focusing on the most, Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy. Anarcha was from Montgomery County, West Scottsville Plantation. We had Lucy, who was from Lowndes County. And then we have Betsy, who was from Macon County. And I'm sorry, Lucy was from Macon County and Betsy was from Lowndes County. And again, who could cure these fistulas, these holes that was formed because these young girls were raped and tortured and was producing more stock. And so J. Marion Sims claimed that he could do it. Anarcha suffered 30 surgeries.
And
without anesthesia.
No, this is the thing. This is before anesthesia existed. So these are vaginal surgeries. They've already undergone multiple births to the point where they have these holes. And now there are 30 surgeries for her without anesthesia. Oh my God.
Yes. And at the age of 17. 17.
And did she survive them?
She did. She actually did. She went on to get married and have children. Lucy and Betsy, they kind of fall off the census. We lose track of them. But they were there in that torture chamber for 3.5 years. in the backyard of his hospital. He opened up a makeshift hospital in the backyard from his office, which is actually located downtown in Montgomery, Alabama. The site is located there.
Oh.
And I was horrified to learn that this doctor is still admired.
Monument.
Yes, he's on a monument that stands about, I think he's about 12 feet tall, and he's in front of our state's capitol. And I started asking the questions, and there's a plaque outside that says that he is the father of modern day gynecology. And I was like, okay, white man, well, where are the mothers? Why are not, why is there no mention of them? And so I said, and this was I moved here in 2002. And so by 2015, actually by 2012, I started making paper mache objects that look like a Black woman. I would dress her up. I would take her to the slave auction block that's literally downtown in the center of our city. I would sit her out there with information that talked about what happened to her, right? And someone one day actually kidnapped her, and I had her wired up so that I could hear what people were saying. And someone from the city put her in the back seat of a car and drove her to her office. And I went on Facebook and I said, I don't know who took her. But then again, if I listen to the tape, to the audio, I'll know who you are. You have 24 hours to bring her back.
Ooh, wait. Okay, so here's that dramatic pause, everybody, because anybody who just tuned in, I want to make sure you're listening to Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. You are listening to a riveting conversation that I'm having right now with Michelle Browder. She is an artist who has created a monument to 3 of the 11 women who were tortured by J. Marion Sims. That's his name, right? Sad that we even know his name and not their names. Women who were enslaved, who were forced to be operated upon by Sims, who is now known as the father of modern gynecology. And Michelle is telling us the story of how the sculpture that currently resides in Montgomery, Alabama, where Sims' sculpture also resides, how it came to be. So, Michelle, you said you made a paper mache, and it was really smart of you to put a speaker in there so that you would hear what happened. So you said you better return her before 24 hours. And what happened?
24 hours later, I get a phone call. And you know what? This was during the time when the gentleman who ran for office, it was our Judge Roy Moore, was in some trouble, and the press they were all here, and they were sitting across the street in the park, and they actually someone saw this woman take Anarcha, what I called Anarcha, and throw it in the back of the car. So I had the audio and I also had video.
Wow.
And so 24 hours later, she shows up at my office downtown. The woman that took her was very apologetic, and I guess she was, because I listened to TMZ. I threatened to send it to TMZ so that they could see just how racist we are still in Montgomery, Alabama. And she begged me, I have children, the whole white tears. I have children. Please don't do this to me. Please don't. We all make mistakes, right? And I just laughed. And I was
Well, here's the thing. What was her plan? What was she going to do with Anarcha? Why did she take her?
At the time, she was actually appointed to be our community arts person. She was over the arts commission here.
Okay.
And so basically it would have been a slap in the face to the city to see that, these were the sentiments of folks that still lived here, because I could hear the audio. I heard the N-word plenty of times. And the fact that it was thrown into a car that the mayor frequently was, shuttled around in. So these were his people. And she begged me not to do it. And I said, only because you have children. But let this be a lesson to you.
Now, this is interesting, Michelle, because just for context, I have been to Montgomery once. I came about a year ago and had the honor of producing an interview with Fred Gray, who, for those who don't know, he is now, I think, 91, still a practicing attorney. He was Martin Luther King's first attorney, and also the attorney for several of the people who were experimented upon with the syphilis, the Tuskegee syphilis study.
Mm.
And I had not, I'd read about Montgomery, but I hadn't been there before.
Mm-hmm.
And an interesting thing that has occurred there, which is smart and sort of, I have mixed feelings about it, that all of these sites that, like you said, there's this, where the slave market was, there's a placard that says what it is. Like at every step where something horrific happened, it is now a tourist destination. So on the one hand, okay, it's good because we get to see our history. It's no longer shrouded. It's no longer, buried. On the other hand, Montgomery's making money off of acknowledging these horrible things that happened. I mean, I felt all kinds of ways when I went from place to place, and I did not see your sculptures at that point. So I think I'm sure I would have felt different, because that's an obvious celebration of these women. So you, as someone who lives there, what does that feel like for you, that all of these moments are acknowledged?
It's traumatizing. It's reliving trauma every day. You cannot go to the state's capital that was built by 200 enslaved African people, forcibly built by 200 enslaved African people. And outside of it stands the treasonous president of the Confederacy, a white man that committed treason and killed over 700,000 soldiers to preserve the right to enslave Black folk, for Black lives that matter. And then you have a Confederate surgeon, and then J. Marion Sims at our state's capital. It grieves me every day to have to drive up that street, to leave the slave auction block, the market where they were bought, sold, and traded, were Black people, men, women, and children, alongside cattle. There's no reference of it unless you go across the street, little small sign over there across the street. I'm infuriated. As a Black woman, to know what happened to our people in the center of this city, and it's not acknowledged in the contributions that were made. You cannot go anywhere in Montgomery, Alabama, and look at a building that does not have the fingerprint of a Black woman or an enslaved child or a man. A lot of the buildings there were made by enslaved people, African people. So it was just the fire that I needed to press through this monument that was in my gut from the age of 18. I knew that I would do something to honor these women in some capacity.
Now, going from the model of Anarcha, who was kidnapped and then ultimately brought back, to what you have today, there's a lot of work in between those two points. Tell us about the development of the art installation.
Yeah. Well, when you say that, oftentimes these things are birthed out of pain. At 48 years old, a woman with her own business, I was told that I didn't belong at a certain table that I found myself at. And I had a triggering moment, and I decided to, during COVID, I opened up a horse farm, because we have 8-9 rescue horses, and, started offering spaces for people to come and to, just feel like you're okay, that we're going to make it through this. And that wasn't enough. And then I heard the beckoning of Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy. And that moment that said, it's time to do something about, about this situation in Montgomery, Alabama. But before then, before we had to shut down in January of 2020, I went out to Hawaii and spent some time with some people. And when I came back, I was visiting with a friend of mine in San Francisco, and we were walking around in Hayes Valley, and there was this beautiful metal sculpture of Tara, which is the goddess, a Hindu goddess. And at the bottom of her feet, I was looking for someone's name, and there was no name. And come to find out, she was a Burning Man artist that created this beautiful, I guess she was about 15 feet tall, metal sculpture. And I said, now this is what Anarcha needs to look like. When people walk around, downtown Montgomery or wherever they find themselves, you have to look up, right? And so my friends were like, well, tell us about this woman? And so I started telling them the story about the mothers of gynecology, what I started calling them. And they said, oh my gosh, this is amazing. 2 weeks later, Harriet, 2 weeks later, my friends, they're Japanese. My girlfriend's Japanese. Her husband is Jewish, so I call him Japanese.
Japanese, I love that.
They're at a Jewish Seder. And across from them was a woman who actually helped volunteer on making that sculpture.
The Tara sculpture.
Right. And so she asked.
Wait, and the Tara sculpture is in
San
Hawaii.
Francisco.
Oh, it's San Francisco.
When I came back from Hawaii, I went to San Francisco and spent some time with my friends whom I met on my tour like 2 years ago. And they lived in this Hayes Valley where the sculpture is located. And at this Seder, there was a woman who asked them the question, well, where do you live? And they said, oh, we live in Hayes Valley. And she says, oh, well, have you seen Tara? And they looked at each other and they immediately got on the phone and called me. They were like, Michelle, because she told them I volunteered on this sculpture. And they said, my friend Michelle is looking for the artist. They called me during the Seder. And 2 weeks later, I'm in conversation with the original artist that built this monument, and for a whole year recorded her. And when I say we, my Japanese family friends and some other friends that I have here, I was like, listen, I have to get you to teach me how to weld. And literally at the end of the year, she said, come to San Francisco. She's a Burning Man artist. Have you ever heard of Burning Man before?
Yes, but tell folks in case they don't know.
Burning Man is like this festival that's held out in the desert.
Yep.
And they build these miraculous sculptures like 15, 20, 40 feet high, and they burn them, or they, when they're finished with them. But it's a week-long creative celebration with folks from all over the country, mainly white folk. But it's starting to be integrated a little bit more. And they go in the desert and creatively have a great time.
Yep.
And so my friends, I had never gone, but I had heard of it. And so at the end of the year, my friend, her name is Dana Albany, she was like, send me your drawings, send me $20,000. I'm getting ready to get this. I rented out the whole box shop. It's called the Box Shop in San Francisco. Had all of the welders, and we metal raisers. People would come and bring their metal. So I flew out to San Francisco. But before I went to San Francisco, I stopped in Las Vegas because there's a gentleman out there named Lou who actually built the frames. It's just a frame, no gender. It's just a frame of these women.
The frames for your 3 women.
Right. And got in a car with him in a truck, and we drove the frames from Las Vegas to Los Angeles, stopped there, had some friends to bring in some metal, went into San Francisco, and I was there for a month and 2 weeks.
All of that work was done in 6 weeks?
No, ma'am. I learned how to weld.
Okay. Okay. I'm like, wait a minute. So, but still, okay. So you got a crash course in welding.
Yes.
Over a 6-week period. And one of the things that I think I heard you say, I know I read it. So this is in the preliminary part. To get the metal, was all the metal, including that first metal, donated, or did you have to buy metal as well?
I bought some, but for the majority that I've used was donated. I did bring like certain pieces of Anarcha, not Anarcha, but Lucy and Betsy. Those are pieces that I bought. And I'll, once you see the sculpture, you'll understand. But so yeah, I stayed there. I learned from 3 of the most creative women. My initial team, they were all women. And this is during COVID, mind you. So we all had on masks. We're in this metal shop. And then 15 other Burning Man artists were like, hey, we have nothing to do because there's no Burning Man. So they were like, can we help in some capacity? And so Dana was like, yeah. So I learned how to braise. I learned how to, to craft the figures, which, they didn't get the booties right. So we had to come back, and when I had to dismantle, because, and our breasts are not flat. So there was some reconstructive surgery that I had to do once they returned, once I came home. But when I came back to Montgomery, my brother flew out. We drove the sculptures in pieces. They were in 6 pieces. And it took me 2 months to set up my shop. The welders cost a lot of money. So I set up a shop in 2 months, and I started welding again in July. I had a full head, well, actually a half a head of Anarcha. I had a half pair of legs, and I had skeletons.
So those were the things that you built, the structure, the basic structure, when you were working with those folks out there.
Right.
That's incredible. Okay, let me remind everybody, you're listening to Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. This is a fascinating story that we're learning today from Michelle Browder, who's an artist and activist, and she has documented through her creativity the mothers of gynecology that are the mothers of gynecology, not because they wanted to be, but because during slavery, this medical doctor, J. Marion Sims, basically snatched them, or they were offered to him as sacrifices. So let's go in deeper. So you make the foundation. You've got all these incredible people who are helping you. This is one of the gifts of COVID and quarantine. People helped each other.
Yes.
There was a lot of greatness that happened during that time.
Yes.
And I say that because when you look, I've looked at your work. I haven't seen it in person, but I've seen a lot of pictures. It looks like you've been welding for your whole life, not like 5 minutes. And so you got a tremendous amount of support and education.
Yes.
What happened when you came home? It took you 2 months to set up, and then what did you do?
Yeah, and 2 months later, so I have this palette, if you will, and a young, beautiful person out of Minnesota saw what I was doing and was like, I want to come down and help. Could you use some help? And I said, yeah, because, basically I just had skeletons. So I had to actually put the skin on them, and they offered to come and support. And so basically they brought in a team of 2 other girls and who are masterful fabricators. And we knocked it out within 2 weeks. We were able to put just the skin, right? So which gave me an actual palette to work with. So
and when
something
you
like this,
skin, is this so because it's metal? Is it smooth? Does it have a texture yet?
No.
What is it? What does the skin look like?
It's perforated metal. And those are pieces that I bought.
Okay.
Perforated, so they had holes in them, which is really a gift, because if you think about the experimentation that these women went through, the holes, the poking, the prodding, that's what it represents. Right. So this perforated metal, we were able to knock it out in terms of putting just the skin on them in 2 weeks. And so then from those 2 weeks, I was able to then go in and finish putting on the adornments of the mothers. And the first thing I did in San Francisco was I created their jewelry. I wanted to give them dignity, respect, and give them something back that, we as Black women love, which is our hair. So one has the Bantu knots made out of bicycle chains, and one has cornrows made out of door hinges, and then Anarcha hair is made out of angular screws, with the curved texture. So so once the skin was on, I was able to go in and finish the piece, and I actually finished them from July. September 25th is the last weld that I did. And actually
September 25th of what year?
Last year, 21.
Okay. And so talk about your vision of deciding what would make the hair, and bicycle chains. Okay.
Yes. Well,
how'd that become the idea for the Bantu knot?
Right. Well, so as the pieces were donated, I would walk around and I was like, okay, hair. And then Dana would say, okay, what type of hair? What type? And I had the sketches already. So I said, well, the bicycle chains has to be for the Bantu knots. And so we had like these metal balls, and they would sculpt the pieces, the chains around the metal balls to formulate a puff, a Bantu knot. And so basically, as I walked through the donations, I would pick out the pieces that we would use for the hair, and it just worked.
Tell us about the donations, because to make these sculptures, these 3 sculptures, it's expensive.
Very.
Expensive. I mean, welding is not taking nothing away from painting, but painting, you need paint and a brush and canvas.
Absolutely.
This is a much more expensive venture. How did you fund it? And I know that many people gave metal. How did you organize that?
Yeah. Well, I funded it with my own money. I jump started it. It took $20,000 just to rent the shop, pay the fabricators, the 3 women that I hired to help me, and then the travel out there. So I believed in this project. I believed that if people saw the vision, because I went to various organizations and various funders, and I asked for support, and they told me they were trying to direct me to somebody else, and I said, okay, this is fine. I'm going to be able to pull this off, because that's what Black women do. And so I used my savings. And as far as the donations, we had these donation parties, these metal fundraisers, and people were just coming. And Dana really called on her friends in San Francisco. And then I have a pool of folks that had taken my tour. So whenever I would go through a city, they would come. I would tell them I'm going to be here for X amount of time. Bring us your metal, whatever you wanted. So we had people that brought out mufflers and bicycles and teapots and all kinds of brass.
Anything.
Yeah, just anything. And was Gina Belafonte brought a spoon that her grandmother had when I was in San Francisco, Los Angeles. So people brought sentimental value to the pieces, and that's how we were able to raise the metal.
And who is Dana? We haven't talked about Dana.
Yeah, Dana Albany. She is a metal fabricator.
And she really worked a lot with you on this?
Yeah, she was my teacher. I call her Teacher Son, because she really taught me what it is to be a welder. But then all of the other people that came in to help, the Flaming Lotus, they're Burning Man artists, but they're women. So we had a rock star team of women that came to help. We had one woman named Heather who helped me with shaping the belly of Betsy, and she says, Michelle, this isn't right. Black women. Actually, she actually went to a Black subject, and to see the curvature of her belly, and so we had to redo it because it just wasn't right. Burning Man artists they're kind of eccentric. So
I want to address that. I'm so glad you brought it up, because this must be the belly that I looked at as I was looking at your art, and there's a beautiful roundness to the belly, and it just feels familiar.
Yes.
And it draws you in. So there was a lot of intention around the creation of that belly.
Oh, yes. We had to, and especially when we got the mothers home, some of the curvature wasn't right. So we had to, break away and redo them. But this one is very meticulous because, and this one meaning the belly of Betsy, because that's where the birth of justice. This is where I really wanted to hone in on sharing narratives of Black women and maternal health and what happens to a Black woman's body when she's forced to have a baby, or when she's having a baby in and of itself is trauma, right? It's a near-death experience. So it's a very important piece. And I'm looking over here because I'm making miniature models that will be able to sell to help us with the phase 2 of this project, which I'm gonna have to get you to come back.
Absolutely.
Come down to Montgomery for this one. But yeah, every piece of them were very intentional. So when I was able to bring them home, I was able to do what I wanted with them. And there's people in the bodies of these women from the slave ship. You've seen the pictures of slave ships, right? And how the stowage was laid. So there's in every one of these women, I wanted that represented. So,
well, I wanted to talk about that too, because when you look at the sculptures, so let's start with the scale and then the detail, because there's sizable sculptures, and then a tremendous amount of detail everywhere.
Yes.
I heard you describe before. I can't remember where it is on one of them, but where you see what looks like the slave ship on the body. So can you tell us the scale? How large are these sculptures, and what are some of these emblems and that live on the sculptures?
Yeah, so Anarcha is the tallest, and she's 15 feet tall. And one thing that I wanted people to do was to look up, because Black women, we've looked down on ourselves and each other, and white folks have created narratives that were angry, that were hostile, that were brash. And so when you come to Montgomery, Alabama, you look up at Black women.
All right.
Don't look down. So she's 15 feet tall. There's one, Betsy is 12 feet tall, and then Lucy is 9 feet tall.
So they're
And
all taller than human beings are.
absolutely, absolutely. When you see them in the photos and when you stand next to them, they're larger than life themselves. There's nothing like it in the United States for Black women.
And then they're adorned with all kinds of objects and
yes,
design elements. What are some of those?
Adinkra symbols. So Anarcha, her Adinkra symbol, the GMA is Goddess Supreme, and her head is tilted back and she's looking towards heaven. Because my thought process with that was, I wonder what they thought about. What were their thoughts? Did they pray through this pain and trauma? And so it was only right, fitting to have her in a prayerful state, but also her hair in braids. I wanted you to know that these were children, that these are just girls. And then Lucy, her Adinkra symbol is friendship, because they actually formed a friendship together simply because they were enslaved and tormented together. And actually, the historians would say that J. Marion Sims lost a lot of his support, and his colleagues started to leave him because of the tremendous pain that these women were going through, even though the notion was that Black women didn't feel pain, or we had a higher tolerance for pain. So a lot of the rumor on the plantation was that he also fathered a child. And so a lot of his colleagues left him. And these women started performing the surgeries. They would hold each other down as Sims would. Yes. So, to think of the mental trauma that you're actually aiding and abetting, or what is it? Stockholm syndrome. And so, so hers is friendship, her Adinkra symbol. And then Betsy's is strength. It takes strength to give birth. I'm not a mother, so I don't know what that, well, actually I kind of do with these three creatively gave birth to, but so each one of them has an emblem of from a Ghanaian emblem, actually, to depict what I felt that they should represent.
Yeah, I want to talk about that childbirth thing in a moment, but let me remind folks, for the last time this week anyhow, you are listening to Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. We are talking about something really important as part of our cultural heritage, all of our cultural heritage. Like for every woman who's gone to the gynecologist, to know that the understanding that exists, especially as it relates to, trauma of that part of our bodies. This man named James Marion Sims, who was called the father of modern gynecology, got that moniker because he experimented on enslaved women against their will. It is because of them that we have some of the understanding of women's reproductive organs. And so we thank them. We honor them, and Michelle Browder is honoring them through this incredible sculpture that exists in Montgomery, Alabama. Michelle, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about what's going on in our world right now. Roe v. Wade. We can believe it, but we can't believe that in 2022, a woman's right to have dominion over her body would be taken away. It's crazy. And one of my dearest friends recently had a baby, and she's written about this, so I can say her name and say it because she's written about it. Her name is Elaine Welteroth. You may have heard of her. She's in the public eye, but she describes that she had a very difficult birth, and a wanted birth, but a very difficult birth, and recognized that for some women, maybe more than we want to know, and way more Black women, childbirth can be deadly.
Yes.
The maternal mortality is highest among Black women. And today, in 2022, I'm not talking about back in the 1840s, right now, including for women who want to have children. And imagine those who have been raped, or who can't afford to take care of a child. And, as we know, Michelle, there's no money coming at the end of the rainbow after you're forced to have that child, right? That's not part of right to life. So when you think of what is happening now, and you think of these sculptures that you have created, what happens in your soul?
Mm. As a woman who believes in the sanctity of life,
Mm-hmm.
I also believe in bodily autonomy.
Me too.
And it's strengthened in the stories of these women who had no autonomy, hence the reason why they have no arms,
Mm-hmm.
who were forced, who were raped and tortured, and there was no way out for them. Uh, I'm just, I was one of those that said they won't be able to pull this off.
Right.
They would not be able to take us back 50 years and put us in the back room where hangers were used. Surely they would not be able to do this, but they were, because of the system of racism and the disrespect for a Black woman's body, or any woman's body for that matter. Um, I'm appalled, but I use the mothers now because Black women are the highest, 3 to 4 times likely
That's
to
right.
die because of the complications of childbirth. And so therefore, Kiera Johnson, her name is on the belly. So
Oh
that we
yes, there's
can,
one with all these names
that's Betsy.
scripted. Yes.
Yes. And so that we could talk about maternal health. So we could show the systemic racism and how the hierarchy of it all was established way before 1619, about these Black women and their bodies. And, just the sheer torture of Serena Williams, Black woman, rich, famous, married to a white billionaire.
Right.
She couldn't even get adequate health care. She's saying something is wrong with my body. So to listen to Black women when we say that something is wrong with us and stop with the stereotypes, to talk about a Susan Moore, who during COVID, a doctor during COVID was telling the doctor what to prescribe for her, but they thought she was a drug addict. A lot of this, the stereotypes and statistics and generalizations that they have about Black women, this is why the mothers are here, so that we can start dismantling that. So we can show where the history of racism in healthcare, or sick care, if you want to say it for that matter. It's appalling, but now we still have much work to do.
So Michelle, these names, and again, one of the mothers has names written all over her belly, her body. There's so many stories behind the names.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, is there an audio version of the sculptures? Like, how do we educate people beyond seeing them? So when you go and see the sculptures, honestly, everybody, you just look it up. How can people find the sculptures to look for them? Where can they go to look?
They can go to anarchallucybetsy.org.
How do you spell that?
ANARCHA Lucy LUCY Betsy BETSEY.org. And so it was important to say their names.
Yes.
So that's why, yeah.
So anarchallucybetsy.org. When you go and look, you are going to be affected by the images of these mothers.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I just noticed from going, studying African and African American art, and recognizing when you go into a museum, if there's not a whole story behind it, a lot of people won't know what it is. So how are you educating people about all of these elements that are on there, those women's names that are on the belly? How can people learn about, bring those stories to life?
Well, I asked the people to just research okay. Fannie Lou Hamer, sterilized. So next year we have, for the 50th anniversary, there is a case, the Ralph sisters case. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they were sterilized at the age of 14 and 13 in Montgomery, Alabama. And we put up a sign. So when you come to the park, there's there's information that people can read about these women, including Fannie Lou and Lucille Times, people or women that you haven't heard of. But these two sisters were experimented on and of course sterilized, and we put up a marker for them to tell their story. And next year is the 50th anniversary of the Ralph sisters case, where they were sterilized for being, quote, feeble-minded. This was in 1973.
Okay, 1973, folks.
73.
We started in the 1840s. We're now in 1973.
73.
And by the way, the people who Michelle mentioned a few minutes ago, including the doctor who had COVID and told people how to treat her. She died.
Yes, she died.
She died because they didn't listen to her. That was in 2021, I believe. So we were talking now. It was either 20 or 21.
20. I think it was 20. It was right when
right the early.
Yeah.
This is now. This is right now. So how can people learn more about you and your work and support you, Michelle?
Yeah, if they just go to that website, or if they want to come and just make a pilgrimage here in February 26th through March 1st, we're having a conference again. We had our first conference in Montgomery this year. Because again, I don't want the mothers, I don't want this monument to be something where people just come and look at. And I really want people to get the information about healthcare and how it's affecting Black women and children. And so our first conference, we had none other than Deidre Cooper Owens, who met she wrote the book Medical Bondage. She's coming back next year. We had Charles Johnson, who talked about his wife Kiera. He's coming back this year. We have Linda Villarosa, who wrote a book. You know Linda? She's coming.
I worked with her for many years at Essence.
Oh, isn't she amazing?
Absolutely.
She's amazing. So she's coming to the conference, and then hopefully, you know, if we do this thing right, we might get Harriette Cole over here. Come on down for a pilgrimage.
Just let me know when. And so where in Montgomery can people go if they are on a pilgrimage? Where are the mothers?
Yeah, they're literally a half block from the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. You leave out of that space and you make a left, and they're the mothers. You can't miss them. They stand tall over the fence. And so, yeah, they're there. And, you know, we're welcoming doulas and midwives. And these women were doulas. They were some of the first because they began, and as a matter of fact, Anarcha went on to be a nurse.
That's amazing.
Caring for doctors who were traveling through Montgomery, Alabama that were sick. J. Marion Sims would rent her out as a nurse to care for these people. So there's so much more.
Just so much. It's too much. It's too much. But we appreciate you bringing these stories to life. Thank you, Michelle Browder. Her website, anarchalucybetsy.org. Please go look. I mean, the mothers are beautiful. Come to her event next year, but meanwhile, go on the website. And if you can make it to Montgomery beforehand, go ahead and do that because it's really so much history. Thank you, Michelle Browder. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hey guys, you've been listening to Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. Hey, this was something I've got a lot to chew on. I hope you do too. I think this is a call for meditation. We need to take these stories in and then let some of it go. Liberate ourselves from the pain, but continue to tell the stories. Until next time, have a great day and make it count.